Hi, welcome back. I've got another video for you where I'm taking a look at another one of Games Workshop's Warhammer the Old World Almanack articles. This one's a sneak peek for combat phase, and it's the fourth one we've received, one for each phase of the game turn, or the turn. So we had strategy phase, we had movement phase, and we had shooting phase. I have videos up for all of those if you're interested, or you can go check out the Warhammer community site where they have articles up. And now we have combat, and we have rounded out how a turn is structured with this article. We'll get some more information next week on some other more specific rules. But for now, it's good enough just to know that we know sort of what a turn is going to look like for the most part, with the only exception really being what does magic really look like? We have seen some spells. We know that it's no longer a phase and that it's scattered throughout the turns, different phases, but we don't know how it's going to work. And I'm mostly hesitant to talk about it because there's no real way, I think, to logically and rationally talk about it without basically going way overboard in speculation or knee-jerk reactions. So I will continue to just mention it and continue waiting for their article on magic, which hopefully comes in a couple of weeks at most. So, combat phase. We get to know that it's all about slinging swords and shouldering pikes. Hopefully that means pikes are back. Pikes were a cool weapon that we lost in 7th edition, I think. There might have been some in 6th. We might even have lost them in 6th edition, actually. They were essentially just spears that were even longer. I mean, it's really all they were. They had a couple of extra bonuses, I think, but mainly it was the spear that was extra long. And it was a neat weapon to have in the game. So, it's broken into 4 steps, just like the other phases, and these are done on a per-unit basis. Choose and fight, calculate result, break test, and pursuit. This sounds like Warhammer Fantasy for those of us that are familiar with it, and for those of us who aren't, or those of you, sorry, who aren't familiar with it, this is basically how it worked before. You would pick a unit who was in combat after the movement phase due to charging, and you would fight that combat. You would figure out who won the combat based on the the casualties and any other bonuses. There would be break tests if somebody failed, a leadership test after losing, and then there was a pursuit where there was a chance to run the enemy down. As you're going to see, it's essentially the same, although there are some actual pretty big changes here. I think this might be, in my opinion at least, the biggest departure from older Warhammer Fantasy stuff that we've seen, at least from my experience as a 6th to 8th edition player. Now, maybe there's stuff here that older editions did that I just wasn't around to play. And if so, that's cool. They have mentioned that they were going to go back as far as even 3rd edition for ideas, and I'm pretty excited to see what they dig out of the history of Warhammer. And if some of that is in here today, then I'm interested to see how it translates into the modern game. Now, getting into the actual choose and fight, as I said, you pick your unit that you want to fight with first. Normally, you're going to do this in a way that's beneficial to you. You probably don't want to fight with your general or BSB's unit first, in case you lose it, unless you're absolutely positive you really can't lose it. And that victory might open up more options for your other units, or it might break their general or their BSB. There's a variety of reasons to do it, but it's always a risk when you take your general or your BSB into combat first, because if you do lose with that unit and they break, run away, whether they survive or not, doesn't matter. You've lost the benefits of the general and the battle standard bearer. And that's just one example of why you might want to pick a unit first or last. After that, you just fight with everybody in the front rank. And before, in 8th edition, we'd have 2 ranks fighting, maybe 3 or 4 even, depending on the size of the unit and the type of rules they have. Now you just fight in the first rank, which is like 6th edition, and I believe 7th edition. What this means is that if you have 3 ranks of 10, let's say you have a big unit, 30 guys, 10 wide, and then there's 20 more behind the first 10, only the first 10 are fighting unless you have some sort of special rule that lets you fight in a second or third rank, and those models will only fight with one attack. Doesn't matter if they have 5 attacks each; they can only use one of them. Um, that's a nice rule to have. I liked hordes in 8th edition. I liked 8th edition in general, but at the same time, it really got out of hand. I'd be charging in with, let's say, 40 clan rats, or no, 40 storm vermin with a screaming bell. And in total, I'd wind up with around, you know, going on 30 infantry attacks. And the same could be said for, you could have 30 warriors of chaos who are very good soldiers, and now you have 30 attacks with them, and there's not much that could survive that, and it led to what were called Death Star units. If you're familiar with any wargaming, you probably know that there is usually in most games, outside of historicals tend to be less designed around this possibility, but most sort of skirmishy or mass battle fantasy games, even sci-fi games, they tend to allow you to build up a unit that's very powerful because not only are the troops good, but you've also put a bunch of like characters and whatnot in there, and you've really stacked all the buffs you can give them, and they wind up being just, maybe almost half your points can wind up in one unit, but then they're really not able to be killed outside of almost like flukes. And you'd have armies that would go to competitions that, they'd field 1,000 points in one unit, and nobody knew how to deal with them. And so they got the term Death Star, and I mean, obviously there were times that you could just outright kill them with magic and whatnot, but in general, it was a very, very annoying way to play and annoying to play against. And so I'm glad to see that going back to one rank is here, because it does take away that ability to have loads of guys in the back swinging with the front, and you just kind of wind up, relying on the front, and the back is only there for any benefits they might offer or to step up and fill in a gap once somebody dies. They also mention that if your front ranks are different sizes when you're fighting, the guy who has more soldiers in the front rank might not be in base to base with everyone. So what those guys will do is those models that are outside of base to base but in the front rank, they're going to wrap around the sides of the enemy unit. This is something we used to see in 6th edition. It was more of a benefit of winning a combat, but it does seem like it's back, and now it's just a way to reward us for taking bigger units, frontage-wise, and not relying on such deep ranks. So that's cool to see too. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. So once you've worked out the fighting of who's going to go first, you check initiative, and this is simply just comparing initiative values. Every model, every unit has an initiative score that they all, if it's a unit, they'll all have the same thing. If it's a character, they'll usually have a higher one, and you just compare them. So if you have a unit that is like the Stone Trolls they mentioned, initiative 1, versus Swordmasters of Hoth, initiative 6, so Orcs and Goblins versus High Elves, the Stone Trolls will not be able to go first. Even if they charge, they're going to go second. There are ways to get bonuses. They mentioned charging, hitting in the flank or rear, and that is probably still not going to help. I feel like they're saying that, there's a way to get a bonus, but mostly that's going to probably benefit units that are closer in initiative. Say an initiative 4 unit that's being charged by a unit with initiative 3. There's probably a bonus of +1, so that the initiative 3 unit's now probably going to strike at the same time as the initiative 4 unit. I feel like that's most likely what we're going to see, because otherwise, I don't know, I feel like it might get out of hand. I think a very simple bonus makes more sense. And I also just like that. It's better than having a automatic first turn if you charge, but it's also better than knowing that your humans are facing elves and there's almost no chance you'll ever get to strike first. That can be frustrating. So seeing it based around initiative is really nice, with bonuses again. And then you have weapon skill and rolling to hit. This is just like the strength chart and the strength versus toughness chart, where you just basically compare your strength and their toughness and see what you need to wound. Except here, it's weapon skill versus weapon skill. Weapon skill is a stat that really only just refers to how good a unit is at swinging their sword or their weapon, whatever it is. And you'll basically see that the worse the troop type, the worse the weapon skill, and the highest weapon skills are going to be reserved almost exclusively for characters. And getting up to things like even 10 weapon skill, that's probably often going to be outside the realm of possibility for most armies. That's things like, it used to be things like greater demons would have weapon skill 10 maybe, like a greater demon of Khorne, Bloodthirster. And outside of that, it was very rare without a magic weapon or something. And I will say it's quite complicated to look at because it's a big chart. But I think a lot of people confuse complicated with just what feels like cluttered, maybe. And maybe this isn't the most attractive way to present this, but it is really the most straightforward, I think. I don't always like it because at times I look at this and I almost feel like I'm going blind or cross-eyed looking at these things. But at the same time, once it's in front of you on a piece of paper, you can literally just pull your finger across, and it's like using a multiplication chart. It's really not hard, and I don't mean this in any sort of like derogatory or insulting way, but essentially, if you could figure out a a multiplication chart in like grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, whenever, then guaranteed you'll be fine with this, even if it like sort of is off-putting when you first look at it. Because I admit, when I first saw these years ago as a kid, I just was like, what? That's a lot of math. And then you realize it's not really math. It's just a bunch of numbers very close to each other. So anyways, essentially what you're going to see is that if you have the same weapon skill, let's go with humans, 3 and 3. Humans and human-like armies are going to have 3 weapon skill. That's the basic human stat of the 3, just across the board usually. Outside of like attacks and leadership. And yeah, so 3 versus 3, that means you hit on a 4 plus because you're the same. You'll also hit on a 4 plus if they have a 4, a 5, or a 6. If they have a weapon skill of 7, 8, 9, or 10, then they have a 5. Then you have a 5 plus chance to hit them. All this is simply take your weapon skill, multiply it by 2, and add 1. So weapon skill 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. If the enemy has less than 7 weapon skill, you're going to hit them on a 4, unless their weapon skill happens to be lower than yours. So in this case here, a 3 weapon skill on your guy against the target's weapon skill of 2, hitting them on a 3 plus. And if they have a 1, you can never hit on a 1, and you can never hit on a 6. You'll never be told you can only hit on a 6. Unless there might be, I will say this, the 6-1 might be possible if there is some sort of debuff aura being put on your guys by an enemy character. There is a possibility, because this existed in 8th edition. There were things that would say like units within X distance are -1 or +1 to hit in combat. Now a 1 will always fail, but there were ways, I guess, to bump it to a 6+ to hit. But really, that's very much a rare situation. You wouldn't be going into most games expecting that. More often than not, this is a completely accurate chart. So, again, looks a little complicated, but really it's not. It's very quick to learn. After a couple of combats, you really will only look at it occasionally just to confirm, but the basic rules are quite simple to follow, honestly, and you won't have any trouble. After that, you just all those guys I told you that were in the front rank, they get their attacks, however many they have. Let's say they have 2 and there's 7 of them, that would be 14 attacks. And then anybody in the rear ranks that are allowed to attack can add 1. And whoever has the higher initiative strikes first. You roll your weapon skill, and then you roll to wound, just like we did in shooting, strength versus toughness. That's the normal strength versus toughness. Check your weapon bonuses, check your model strength, check their toughness, and so on. and then do the armor saves again as normal, just like we've seen in shooting phase. And then you just take off any casualties. So whoever goes first makes their attacks, casualties are removed. Whoever goes second makes their attacks, casualties are removed. And then you move into combat result calculation. Now, this is where, again, Warhammer Fantasy does look a little complicated. This is probably the one phase I think that might scare people, because it does harken back to the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s method of game creation that GW had. Many people really like Age of Sigmar and current 40k because they consider it very user-friendly, very noob-friendly, where you can step into the game and you don't have to learn all these charts and stuff we're looking at. It's just a simple, well, a guardsman hits on a 4+, a space marine hits on a 4+. There are strength versus toughness checks. But then at the end, it's, there's not a lot of ways to figure out who won. You basically just go like, how many guys did I kill? How many guys did you kill? I killed more, so I won. It's not always that simple, but in my experience so far, it does feel mostly that it's pretty much just that. Whereas in Warhammer Fantasy, you do have a lot of different things you can see here that can actually change the outcome of who wins. It's not just straight up kills. Unsaved wounds that were inflicted each cause 1 point, or each give you 1 point. So if Unit A causes 3 wounds and Unit B causes 4 wounds, Unit B looks like they're winning. Except, now you need to add a rank bonus. They don't specify here, but I do assume they're going to maintain the old rank bonus system, which meant the front rank does not count, and you can only have a maximum of 3. There were ways to break that. There almost always is ways to break the rules for special situations, but overall, it was pretty much in every battle, that's how it was going to work. So if Unit B only has 1 rank after the front, let's say they went for a very wide facing, and they're this unit is not 20 guys, or it's not 25 guys. Let's say Unit 1 has 25 guys and Unit 2 or B, had 16. They won't have a bunch of ranks. Maybe they went 8 and 8. So 2 ranks of 8 because they wanted more attacks. They only wind up doing 4 wounds, which again looks like they're winning until you look at the other unit who lost by 1, but they have 2 more ranks. They lost 4 guys, but they had 5 ranks total, including the front. And so even though 1 rank was depleted, there's still 3 in the center that are providing +1 each. Now, the Unit B is 4 + 1 for their extra rank, and Unit A is 3 + 3. So they're at 6 now it's 6 to 5. They both have a standard for +1. Unit B does have a battle standard, let's say. Now they're tied at 6. Neither have a flank attack, neither have a rear attack. There's no overkill, which I'll get to in just a second. But then, Unit A is up on a hill. That's the high ground. It just means that your guys are elevated. And all that means in Warhammer Fantasy is that if you've agreed at the start of a game, a piece of terrain is considered elevation. That allows you to see over units and shoot at things that otherwise would be blocked by units that are in between, or buildings that are in between, or woods that are in between, etc. If you're also up on that hill and you get charged, you get a benefit because it's easier to fight down than it is to fight up. That +1 puts them back to 7 versus 6. And then overkill is simply, for every point of damage you do to a single model past the wounds they have, you get an extra point. So if Chaos Lord with 5 attacks hits a unit champion, Empire unit champion, he hits 4 times, he wounds 3 times, and all 3 wounds are caused. That Empire champion only has 1 wound, meaning the 2 wounds after that are considered excess wounds, and they cause 2 points of overkill. Now, in the combat that I'm hypothetically describing, this didn't happen, so right now Unit A, even though they did less damage, is actually going to win that combat by 1. and then you go down to the break test. If a draw happens, you just hold the battle lines as they look. The units don't move, nothing else is done. But if one side loses by even 1 point, they take a break test. This is really simple. You just roll your 2 dice for your leadership, and then you compare it to this. If the natural roll, meaning you roll 2 dice and whatever actually shows up on the dice, ignoring any modifiers, is higher than the leadership. So let's say leadership is 8, and they roll a 9, a 10, 11, or 12. They have they have broken because the natural roll was higher than their base leadership test of either the unit champion or the hero, and they're just going to run away. These guys have panicked, and as a unit, they turn around and they run away. Usually 2 dice 6 inches is how it worked. And it's probably going to be the same thing here. The modified roll, now this is the option 2, if the modified roll is higher than the leadership stat, but it is lower as a natural roll, what happens is they fall back in good order. So this one might be a little confusing, but it's really not. It just means that, let's say, again, you have leadership 8, and you roll 7. You naturally passed, but you're at -2. Now your 7 becomes a 9, which is higher than 8. So unfortunately, on the modification, you have failed. Your unit does not break and flee, though. Breaking units, they run away, they lose their ranks, characters don't provide their bonuses anymore, wizards can't do magic, and so on. The unit is basically in a blind panic, and if they get attacked again, there's a good chance you can just outright be wiped out. They'll just be killed because somebody touches them. Or they'll be forced to run even further, meaning they basically just wind up way out of position. And that's the best outcome. Falling back in good order is not fully explained, but what I believe is going to happen here is that the unit's simply going to step backwards while still facing the enemy unit a certain number of inches. I don't know if you'll roll or if it's a set number. That doesn't matter right now. All that matters is that, let's say it's 2 inches or 4 inches. Your unit's just going to get pulled back that far. That means they've recognized that they're losing the combat, and they're trying to disengage. They don't want to run away panicking because they'd be turning their backs and they could be wiped out. Instead, they're simply keeping their shields up, and they step backwards. The final option is that the modified roll is lower than the leadership stat, or you've rolled a double 1, which we used to call insane courage. It'll probably be the same thing. The unit then gives ground. Sorry, I have it's very cold up here, but it was also very warm. Like a week ago, we've had weird weather, and I've sort of picked up a cold as a result. Plus, I work with kids, so young kids are always very close to you, and they cough on you, and you catch basically everything that's in the school, unfortunately, and I've probably caught something. So I do apologize for all the coughing and sniffling. I'm trying to keep it to a minimum, but it's quite difficult even with a nice cup of water here with me. So a modified roll that's lower than your leadership, that's awesome. That's perfect. That means your unit's only going to give ground. This to me sounds like they're simply going to step back 1 inch, like we see in Age of Sigmar. It just basically means that the combat is technically over, but then we're going to see what can happen as a result. So this is the part that's a major change. The combat result table, that's basically the same as we've seen between 6th and 8th edition, as I recall. You know, some stuff might be new, but for the most part, I believe it's actually just returning rules. It's the break test. The break test before was simply pass or fail. And if you failed, you always broke. You always fled in disorder, and you would basically then have a unit that you had to hope it was your turn next and you could rally them. Now it looks like there's more ways to keep your unit in the game and not have very important units getting wiped out. It's always bad to lose your general. It's always bad to lose your BSB. It's especially bad for some armies, like for example Tomb Kings or Vampire Counts, who again, I know they're not going to become a core faction yet, but they suffer from the same problem. Some armies required a certain character to be on the board, otherwise you began taking constant damage against every unit. If the High Priest, the Hierophant of your Tomb Kings, If he gets chased away and run down because you failed by one, sorry, um, because you failed by one, you just lost that guy, and now your whole army starts losing maybe 2 or 3 models per turn. Not just your turn, but both players' turns, and it's devastating, and it does very quickly drain your army. And then also, again, just losing your general sucks. Losing your characters sucks. This gives you a chance for them to not completely and utterly run away and wind up out of the game. So I do like this. It's a little different. It's actually a lot different, but it's a good change, I think. I think this is a lot more nuanced, and it gives us a new way to play the game. I'm quite happy with that. So, big change. Now, they do also give an example here. They lost by 3 points in this case. Swords Masters, leadership 8 against the Trolls. They lose by 3 points. So it just comes down to what they roll. If they roll a 2, 3, 4, or 5, they give ground. 6, 7, 8, they're going to fall back in good order. 9 to 12, they're going to break and flee. We'll see how that goes. They're going to talk about morale breaking and psychology next week. We're going to see things like fear and terror, which were modifiers in combat, where models that are causing fear, the undead, or terror because they're monsters, they could cause units to fight worse when fighting against them, or even just run away. So we'll see more about that next week, which is nice. Now, run them down. Sorry. When you win the combat, you now have 3 choices. If the unit, is running, or just, has stepped back, they're not staying in combat, basically, you can choose to restrain. This means that you've allowed them to leave. You've allowed them to get away, whether it's in a blind panic or if it's just in good order or giving ground. They're stepping away, and you, for whatever reason, are happy, whether, next turn I get to charge, or, maybe it's their turn. You're just like, you know what? I don't care if he charges me back. Obviously, I can beat him in combat. And right now, I'm in a good position. Me chasing him might put me out of position. So you would restrain. You just take a leadership test, and if you pass, you just you don't move, and you can do a free reform. That just means you can change your guys into whatever formation you like, whether that's the combat formation, the marching formation, or so on. Follow-up is if a unit gave ground, you just basically follow them. So let's say it is 1 inch. They step back 1 inch. You step forward 1 inch. Combat continues. It's just like as if they passed. Because you've decided that you don't want them to continue escaping. You're happy with the way things are going. You're winning. Why would you not continue? So you just step up and, combat continues. And then there's pursue. Well, they're running away. They're going too far. Whether it's a panic or maybe if they're going to fall back in good order, I don't know there. Whether or not you can chase both. The point is, though, it's probably going to be simply rolling 2 dice and comparing it to how far they went. The way it used to work is simply you would compare your chasing roll versus their fleeing roll. If you rolled equal to or better, you simply caught them. They ran 8 inches, you ran 8 inches. And what happens is you catch them, that unit is immediately destroyed. And that's a way to really quickly swing a combat. Cavalry are even better at this because they normally are going to roll 3 dice and pick the 2 highest. This is a very, very pivotal point in a battle when units start breaking and fleeing, when they're running away. If you can run them down without putting yourself in a very bad position where you're going to get flank charged or even rear charged by something that's going to outright kill you after, there's almost no times that you're not going to do that. Again, there might be a case where like, oh, well, my general's in this unit, and if I chase you, I'm going to kill this little 150 point nothing unit of spearmen. But then that unit of cavalry that's sort of over there is going to have a flank or rear charge against my general's unit. And because it's in the flank or rear, I'm going to have bad return combat. And I might get wiped out. I'm probably not going to have rank bonuses. And all the things that would make you win that combat are suddenly gone. So there's no reason to do that. It's better to let them go. That's not always going to be the case. More often than not, you'll be okay. Once you start breaking enemy units and they're running, they're running. That means there's a hole in their line, and you've now exploited it. The last option they do mention is overrun. This happens if you go into combat and kill everything. You are then allowed to move directly forward, your full move. I don't know if they're suggesting you can only make a full move or if you can make up to a full move. But the way it's written, it does say a full move. So I'm going to assume they wrote that on purpose. And let's say your movement is 4, you'll just get to move 4. If your movement is 8, you'll move 8. If that takes you into another combat, that's going to count as a fresh charge. The reason I think it might be your full move is that if you overrun with 2 dice, you might only go an inch, or 2 inches. But you're also, and then you're in a position where you might get, you want to combat, but then you just sort of walked lazily forward, and then you're going to get charged back. But if you get your full movement, you might move into the next unit in the line, and they do say this is a fresh charge. What's interesting about this, especially where they're talking about heavy cavalry being excited about this rule, in 8th edition, I believe it was added, if you did a fresh charge, just like they're suggesting, you win a combat and then you continue moving, and it takes you into contact with a new unit that's already been in combat. So turn 2, you fight their unit of spearmen with your unit of swordsmen. Turn 3, you charge into the flank of another unit of spearmen, you break them, you run them down. As you're doing that, you kill them all, I guess, in this case. As you're doing this, you simply run past where they were, killing all the models in that unit, and you contact the unit that was already in combat. What would happen is those knights would then get to fight again. It's incredibly rare in Warhammer Fantasy to fight 2 times in a turn, but it was a way to do it, and I have definitely been on the receiving end of that more than once, and it's incredibly frustrating, but it's incredibly satisfying if you're the person who can pull it off, because you've now shown that you have a good tactical plan, because you set them up in a way where, they thought that, maybe they were holding, but then all of a sudden you were able to, Riders of Rohan them and just fly through the side of their army. This is good as far as I'm concerned, if that's how it's going to work, because it also helps clean up battles faster. Instead of having the game drag out, it does allow you to, once you're winning, it doesn't stay as a slog. You start having the chance to really quickly affect a battle. And I don't know. I like long games, but it is nice to have ways to break them faster instead of sitting there just, trading a handful of dice every turn. Then they talk about the magic that the wizards can do. Assailment spells are for that phase. They give 2 examples. Hammer Hand, 7+, range is combat. The caster picks somebody he's in combat with, engaged with, and he'll do 2 die 3 strength 4 hits at AP -2. Basically, a big magic fist comes out and he punches them with it, and he might kill a bunch. That's an incredibly nice spell at strength 4 and AP -2, because even if you're facing, relatively decent toughness models, I mean, toughness 4 is considered pretty good for most units. You're wounding them on 4s, and at -2, even good armor is significantly dented. A 1+ save becomes a 3+. All of a sudden, you go from, an 18% chance to kill to a 33% chance that those guys are going to fail their armor. So that's pretty good. I like that. And Soul Eater. And basically, the Dark Mage reaches out and pulls the soul from the enemy. 7+ again. Combat again. You pick a single enemy model the caster is engaged in combat with. I don't know if they mean base to base, or if just they're both in the same combat. They're both engaged technically in the combat, whether they're next to each other or not. And that model takes a strength 3 hit, multiple wounds 3, meaning if it wounds, they take 3 wounds. And they get no armor saves, but they do get ward and regeneration. This could be a general killer. Generals usually had 3 wounds. If you could simply pluck his soul out for 3 wounds, if you get lucky, um, that's awesome. It does basically mean that a lot of people will feel like they have to put the best possible ward saves on their characters at all times, and that was pretty normal anyways before. But that's a nice spell. It's a very fluffy feeling spell of the evil wizard grabbing someone's soul and just snuffing them out in a single, incantation. I really like it. It's still not guaranteed because the strength is low, and the ward and regeneration saves are there as well. But yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, next week, morale and psychology, fear, terror, hatred, all the good stuff, as they say. And I agree, those are good things. They make the game so much fun. I'm interested to see how far back we go. Is fear and terror something where, if you go into combat with a fear causing unit, oh, I might be scared of them. I might have a harder time hitting. Or is it going to go further back where we had units like skeletons that caused fear, and if you failed, if you lost a combat to fear-causing enemies and they outnumbered you, you had to run away because you essentially your guys just started outright panicking because they're fighting dead dudes and there's a lot of them and they can't win, and how do you beat something that's already dead? And they just run away. We'll see how this goes. I'm quite excited. Again, one seriously big change this week was up here. But for the most part, it just feels like Warhammer. And this doesn't not feel like Warhammer to me. This feels like a more refined Warhammer, and I'm very happy with it. Yeah, no, this is great. I think that we all have a lot to look forward to if we are returning players. I think that it might not feel exactly the same, but I think that for the most part, we're all going to be pretty happy. And it's going to come down to how the armies look. And I hope that we, in the next couple of weeks, start hearing when those armies are going to start getting previewed. There are 9, and if we continue with what they've done before with like 40k, we are going to get 1 faction per week, same as we're getting one of these per week. That's 9 weeks. And if the game is coming out in February, um, you know, 4 of them in January, maybe a couple more in February. There's probably going to need to be some of them released in December. I'm hoping that in about 2 weeks we'll be done with psychology. We're going to be done with magic, and hopefully before Christmas we'll also get information on what type of bases we need so we can start prepping. Part of me thinks they might try to just hold that information to the last minute so we buy their new movement trays, but hopefully they just tell us and we can actually know that 20 becomes 25, but like what else is changing? We know it's bigger on other models, but like how much bigger? Some of us are just going to want to make our own trays. I've only been holding off because I want to know before I start getting into this. Although over Christmas, I'm sure I'm going to be making some of my 20 to 25 millimeter bases. I have some ideas of how to do it, and yeah, I'll share that too when I get to it. Anyways, I'm definitely just rambling here at the end. I need to get this over with. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for any comments you have to leave down below. And if you have any thoughts about this, I want to hear them. Um, you know, what do you think this game is going to look like? How are you thinking it's shaping up? And, are you ready to, get back on the battlefield with your old armies or start something new? Anyways, thanks for watching and have a great day.